Russia has invaded Ukraine. Now, if you ask me for my personal opinion, I mean, all war is wrong. All invasions are wrong. But at the same time, John, I do remember I was pretty critical as well of this invasion that was not happening. Just the build-up on the Russian side of the border, the build-up on the Ukrainian side, and then weeks and weeks of saying it's never going to happen. But it did. So what happened there?
Well, if you see it from the Russian side, without taking the side of Russia, it looks rather different. There was Russian troops, as you may remember, up to February, massing on the Ukrainian border, and they eventually invaded. That was the news on this side of the border. On the other side of the border, there were 60,000 Ukrainian troops who were massing on the line of contact right across Donbass. Now, Donbass, as far as the Russians are concerned, is the last stepping stone. You're close by Russia, you have a strategic advantage over Russia. Everything in modern Russian history, and in not so modern history, tells us that the Russians will never tolerate this, that they regard this as a threat, and they have much of their history to justify it, to understand why things are happening, or what is likely to happen. Our ignorance of Russia, like our ignorance of China in the West, allows none of that historical sense of how people see the threat and how political forces see the threat. This is not in any way to, if you like, condone Putin's invasion, but it has to be understood. So I don't think Russia is going to gain from this. Once you unleash war, then literally anything can happen.
Is this going to be a decades-long war? Because it seems like the US is determined to defeat Russia in Ukraine itself by arming the Ukrainians, by building a coalition against Russia, etc. And Putin, for whatever reason, whether it's a loss of face or whether he's determined to stay the course, I mean, that is going to go on for a long time, right? And at the same time, there's also a distinct danger, a real danger of it escalating to something that nobody wants to see.
Yes, you must remember, though, that above all, this is a war of propaganda. And I would think almost nothing one reads in the Western press about the invasion of Ukraine is to be trusted. A skepticism, or the skills of skepticism, that I'm not sure the reading public, the watching public, particularly in the United States, possesses. That is crucial now, because nothing can be believed. Every day when I scan the media, I look at the source. It's Ukrainian intelligence. The propaganda operation in Ukraine is quite brilliant. They've managed to invent a chemical warfare attack when there wasn't one. They've managed to keep out of the Western media the fact that so much of Ukraine is infested, if not run by, but infested with true extremists, fascists, neo-Nazis, they are called. The United States may be about to fight, you're saying, or to encourage a war in which it plays a leading role in Ukraine. What to remember here is the US doesn't give a damn about Ukraine. Ukraine is simply a pawn in this, but the object, as the US Defense Secretary is, and I paraphrase him, is to destroy the Russian Federation. That's been known for a long time. That is probably the most dangerous project in the world today, because the Russians are not going to allow that.
When you talk about not trusting anything that you see in the media, unfortunately, even being a member of the mainstream media myself, I have to agree with you to a great extent there because of the disproportionate coverage in this war. It's reached a stage where anything that the Ukrainians do is glorified, and anything that the Russians do is vilified, to the extent now that you have mainstream Western media celebrating news from Ukraine, like pictures of dead Russian soldiers being sent back to their mothers. There's almost a celebratory tone in the media. And this begs the question, what happened to empathy? We're not asking for sympathy here, not asking for sympathy for the Russians as an invading force, but empathy for humans, right? For young lives, soldiers who've been sent into war, not by their choice. They follow, it's the military, they follow orders.
Well, I've spent my career working in the mainstream, and I've covered probably 7, 8, 9 shooting wars. I've never seen a coverage so utterly consumed by a tsunami of jingoism and of manipulated jingoism as this one. And that's why nothing should be trusted. I say that to people all the time. I said, unless you're going to sit in front of your television and deconstruct what you see, actually take it away with you and check it and try to verify it as much as you can. And if you can't, to discard it. Well, most people don't have the time to do that. I don't have the time to do it. And yet the reporting, this is probably the first war in Ukraine reported by social media. That doesn't call on the highest standards of professionalism. But it does mean that at least we have a way to question what we see and hear and read in the mainstream media. The mainstream media is part of a propaganda war. But that's the truth. And we must be skeptical. We must be skeptical of absolutely everything.
That we're playing a winning hand and that we are capable of backing Putin into a corner. And we're getting close to pushing him off a cliff. Is this good? You're talking about a country that's got thousands of nuclear weapons. And the only circumstance, really, under which states use nuclear weapons is when they're desperate, when they think their survival is at stake. So what you're talking about is putting Putin in a situation where he's desperate. And if you go home and Google Putin and nuclear brinksmanship, you'll be reading all the articles that come up for the next 2 years, right? Because he's making it clear that you're fooling around with his core strategic interests. And again, he's got thousands of nuclear weapons. So you're putting yourself in a position, right? You're putting yourself in a position where you're willing to risk a possible nuclear war over a piece of real estate, Ukraine, that is not of vital strategic interest to the United States. Again, it's not of vital strategic interest to us. By the way, and this will be my final point on this, what's truly amazing about all of this is that we were talking about incorporating Ukraine into NATO when we have now acknowledged by not taking military action over Ukraine that it's not a vital strategic interest. You understand that when you incorporate Ukraine into NATO, you're giving them an Article 5 guarantee, which says you'll come to their defense if they're attacked. You only give Article 5 guarantees to countries that are of vital strategic interest, like Germany during the Cold War. What were we doing? Giving an Article 5, thinking about giving an Article 5 guarantee to a country that's not a vital strategic interest. It just shows you how discombobulated American foreign policy is these days. And of course, the Ukraine crisis is just one of many messes that we've made. As you know, we have the Midas touch in reverse. There's nothing that we do that doesn't go south. Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Ukraine, I could go on. So the point I'm making to you is, I do not think that this is going to work, but if it does work, I'm not sure it's a good thing. When I give this talk, many people in the West think that there's sort of a deep-seated immoral dimension to my position because I'm blaming the West and not Putin, who certainly has authoritarian or thuggish tendencies. There's no question about that. But I actually think that what's going on here is that the West is leading Ukraine down the primrose path. and the end result is that Ukraine is going to get wrecked. And I believe that the policy that I'm advocating, which is neutralizing Ukraine and then building it up economically and getting it out of the competition between Russia on one side and NATO on the other side, is the best thing that could happen to the Ukrainians. What we're doing is encouraging the Ukrainians to play tough with the Russians. We're encouraging the Ukrainians to think that they will ultimately become part of the West, because we will ultimately defeat Putin and we will ultimately get our way. Time is on our side. And of course, the Ukrainians are playing along with this. And the Ukrainians are almost completely unwilling to compromise with the Russians and instead want to pursue a hardline policy. Well, as I said to you before, if they do that, the end result is that their country is going to be wrecked. And what we're doing is, in effect, encouraging that outcome. I think it would make much more sense for us to work to create a neutral Ukraine. It would be in our interest to bury this crisis as quickly as possible. It certainly would be in Russia's interest to do so. And most importantly, it would be in Ukraine's interest to put an end to the crisis.